So here I've got a Retina Xenon f1.9 50mm lens made by Schneider from Kruznak, and this is for a Kodak Retina S type lens, so it's for a Retina IIIS rangefinder, Reflex S, Reflex III, Reflex IV or Instamatic reflex. This is a comparatively early one because it's got the focus coupling there, the rangefinder coupling to suit the Retina IIIS rangefinder camera, and that's something that stopped being done some years later by the time they got to the Instamatic reflex, or possibly even at the time of the Reflex IV. So this lens, what's its problems? Well, it's quite tidy. The lens hood section here at the front, the filter mount, that feels quite good. It's not knocked about. The diaphragm is very sluggish to close down. You can see that's... Open it up again. Watch how slow that is to close down. That's no good. You'd get away with that in a rangefinder camera. That would be absolutely hopeless on a reflex camera. So it's certainly, the mechanism's sticky. The glass looks good. I don't think there's going to be a problem with the glass. The aperture blades there, the diaphragm blades, there's a hint of oil on those blades. I'll certainly clean those. I typically don't dismantle the diaphragms in these completely. They're doubled up. You only see 5 blades there, but each of those is 2 pieces. They're a bugger to get back together. So getting into the lens, how do we go about that? Well, there's a retainer here, the central conical section, and I'm going to use a friction tool on that, and that's it. That's all it required. Friction tool, it loosened up straight away. You could engage some other sort of tool, and there are lens spanner. There's 2 holes there. I'm using one of them just to put a toothpick in there to wind that out. So there's the retainer. That's the central conical section. And then this piece here just lifts off. Our filter mount name ring, that just comes off. And then in from here. So the lens capsule is held into the body with 3 screws and washers here. Now, this is where you can make adjustments to your focus too, because the focus scale ring can be shifted relative to the outer helical, this brass piece here with the notch I'm pointing at, just by shifting, basically loosening the screws, sliding it round and retightening the screws. We want the lens capsule out, so I'll remove the 3 screws and their washers. And tip them into a container. The lens capsule now just comes straight out of the mount, and looking at the lens capsule, we have our outer helical here. Basically that just moves on the brass centerpiece there. Here's our diaphragm at the back. You can see that opening and closing as I move that tab. Now that's moving smoothly. There's no stickiness in there, even though I can see oil on those blades. So I'll clean those blades, but I'm not doing anything right at the moment. Let's start with the mount. So here's the mount. Start from the back, remove the 4 screws that hold the piece here, the bonnet mount, in place. One of them here has got a touch of red paint on it. We'll put that back when I'm done. Keeping a lot of downward pressure on the screwdriver as I undo those screws so that I don't slip and make a mess of a screw head. So I'll pop those screws carefully to one side, noting where they came from and not mixing them up with the others. Lift this off. Okay, so in this case, this is the bayonet mount, and on the bayonet mount at the back here, this is the cam that couples to the rangefinder on a Retina IIIS camera. This is quite sticky. That'll need to be taken apart and cleaned. It should have some drag. If it's dry, it sort of chatters. It's got a nasty feeling like one of those kids' chatter rings that were all the rage decades back. So make note of these rings and the order you take them off. I usually lay them out in order. This one's got a spring on it. That's unhooked from its spring. I've got a spacer here. The second depth of field pointer. This ring below it is also held on with a spring. The larger of the two diameters. There's two springs there. One's a larger diameter than the other one. In this case, the larger diameter spring was coupled to the hook on this piece, which is a little cam follower here. I'm going to see if I can get those springs off, because they're a bit easily damaged while you're handling this. So if I can get them to come off, I can pop them to one side and not end up with an unwanted kink in the middle of one of them. Yeah, I got that off, and the bigger one fell off easily because it comes off over the pin quite easily. The smaller one clips onto that pin quite tightly. So that's the control rings from the back of the shutter. I'll just zoom out a bit so you can see how I've got them placed. So I know what order they go back in. As I took them off, I started placing them. So they're all sitting there ready to go. Here, this holds the pieces together here. This is our focus scale ring, and this is the body. Now this is quite stiff. Basically it's very gummy. I've got 4 screws holding these 2 brass clamps in place. So I'll remove those. And put those carefully to one side so I know where to find them. They don't have washers on them. You shouldn't mix them up for the 3 screws that came out of the front. I should be able to lift this apart. So here, there's our brass pieces I've just took the screws out of. They're very sticky with old grease. Now there's a thin plastic washer here. It's Teflon, or it's something very like Teflon. Don't stretch it. If you stretch it, it's a bugger getting it back into place. You may even have to cut it and put it back in sections. If you stretch it, it won't want to go back neatly. It's held on here with these 2 screws. These 2 screws hold this guide pin here, and that guide pin stops the inner helical on the lens capsule from rotating as it moves. So I'm going to remove those 2 screws. You won't mix them up easily. They're sort of countersunk. They sit in to the recess on that bracket. Make a note of which way that bracket went too. Now I'll take that washer off, that plastic shim, and that I'll clean very carefully with some naphtha on a piece of paper. And basically I've got my lens mechanism here stripped down. or at least the first part. I've still got to strip this down, but that'll come second. This is the bits we're most concerned with, and all of these parts I now need to clean with naphtha and get ready to reassemble. Most of these pieces go back dry, they shouldn't have any grease on them at all. So starting with this piece, I want to get rid of all of that grease that I can see on that mount. Most of that had no business being there, and chances are it's just transferred its allegiance from the focus helical when the lens has been warm and the grease has been at its runniest. So I want all of that out of there. Grease in the wrong place here causes problems because we've got a lot of broad, flat, thin sections on these rings, and they have any grease in between them, they tend to glue themselves together, and then nothing moves freely. Some of those components counter-rotate so that if there's any stickiness between them, the effect is magnified. The outside of this lens is quite clean. Cosmetically it's quite a good example. But you may well find that you've got a lot of dust and dirt trapped in around the edges there to get rid of. This piece, this is our focus scale ring. Be cautious cleaning this. On some of them the markings may be faded, they may have sort of lost their, I think they had like a lacquer coat on them once upon a time. You know, if that's gone, then the markings may wipe away disturbingly easily when you're cleaning it. So take great note of what you're doing, how hard you're wiping, and what effect it's having. There's a lot more thick black grease coming off here. Probably graphite grease on here at one stage. Some of this will be ingrained dust that's been picked up and stuck to grease. It's just forming a grinding paste now. The grease is dried, it's gone quite sticky. That's why you need to get rid of all of it. After a while, grease ceases to be a useful lubricant and it just becomes a nuisance. This tab here couples to the cam here for the rangefinder. You can't remove it to get in between here and clean underneath those edges, so normally I just take a cotton bud, tear some cotton off it, put some naphtha on it, and then force it down through that gap with the aid of a toothpick to wipe that surface under there that I otherwise can't get at. That's done. This thing, I'm going to put this on a piece of paper while I clean that. The main thing I'm interested in here is getting it clean of all that sticky grease, but also I don't want to make sure I don't stretch it. There's a bit coming off, but not much. It must be on the other surface, most of that. Just flip that. There we go. That looks much better. Let's give that one a once over and we'll call that done. That to one side. Now these brass pieces, these are quite greasy. Now the two ends of these where they hold back against that focus scale ring are beveled and they've got some sort of coating on them. It's some low friction surface, some sort of plastic of some sort, I would think. I don't know what it is. It's Teflon or something like Teflon. In an old lens that's had a lot of dust and grit get in there, that stuff could be worn away. You're going to be relying on your lubricant to make those bits move smoothly in future, which is okay, and you can get by. So I'm just cleaning those surfaces to get all the dust and the old grease and rubbish off there. Put them to one side. This piece, I'll just clean that. I'm just about ready to reassemble those pieces. So first off, I want that plastic washer arrangement back again. Work out where this goes. Set that way up. That looks like it. Okay. And our clamp went there. That post. The second screw in. I'm just making sure that this disc is sitting down flat. I can do up those two screws. Now the focus scale ring is going to go back on here. Here's the pointer on for your focus scale ring, and obviously that's going to come up somewhere on the number scale there. So first of all, I'm just checking the feel of this. It's doing its best to pick up that nylon, that Teflon washer there, causing me grief. I will put this on a block of wood. Can you still see? Yes, you can just still see. I'll put one of those brass plates in place. It's going to clamp this in position. And get my 4 screws. Just run that screw down lightly. Same for the next. And on this side, I'll do the same. This one's got to go down underneath that coupling for the rangefinder arm. Doesn't want to slide through there. What's it picking up on? Just catching the edge of the plastic. I'll just check the feel of that. It's smooth, possibly a bit more friction than I'd like. I'm checking the action to see if there's any rock in there. These are effectively like wedges. As you pull them out, it will pull this in tighter. If they're too tight, obviously you'll have a lot of friction. If they're too loose, you'll have rattle in the mount, which you can feel by stressing it with your fingers. I've certainly got no rattle there. That seems quite good. I can feel a bit of movement in this direction. So something needs to be tightened up slightly. What I'm doing is looking down at these rings to make sure that they're concentric, the inside edge, and if they're not, well, it means that one end's pushed further out than the other. They should be fairly even. That one there's out a bit perhaps. Just slacken the screw, push that across. Still moving smoothly. That feels good. I will do up my 4 screws on those brass pieces. I'll check the action. Now that's got a nice feel to it. Right, I'm going to apply a little bit of molybdenum paste in here now. Just on the visible aluminium surface here, where it runs underneath those clamps. That'll pick up and spread along here. Yeah, that's moving a little bit smoother than it did. That's good. I'm pleased with the feel of that. It's not rattly loose, it's just got a nice controlled feel to it. No stiffness. Alright, that is ready to start putting bits and pieces back in. They'll all have to be cleaned, of course. And while I'm here, I'll look at this piece, because this is going to have to be cleaned too. Now there are 3 screws. They hold 3 little tabs, and the tabs hold the ring in place, the brass ring. These are easy enough to take out. They're a bit more entertaining getting the screws back in because they're quite small. They don't want to fit through the holes in those small plates and line up with the holes in the mount as conveniently as I'd like them to. Right, we'll just tip that out. Okay. So this, you can probably see that there's some sort of, yeah, that's grease. There's a lot of grease and rubbish at the back there which shouldn't be there. So all of this needs to be cleaned. I need to get all the grease and crap off it, and I'll lubricate this very sparingly when I put it back together. I'll clean these 2 components now. There's quite a bit of grease in this mount at the back here. None of that should be there, it's not doing anything useful. And on the outside I'm getting rid of any grease, but I'm mostly concerned with getting dust or grit or anything like that off the outside. That appears to be quite good. And this piece, which is the cam to connect to the rangefinder pin on the Retina IIIS camera, I'll just check that that's all free from sticky old grease. I will put some light lubricant on this, but I don't want that sticky stuff off. That should be fine. So I'll pop that in there, see if it moves freely. Yeah, it does. There's absolutely no drag there, that's good. And I will take a smear of molybdenum paste around that top lip, and then on the ramp, on the slope where it will couple to the rangefinder pin, and on the inside edge there, that should be sufficient. It needs very little. As I said, it's too much will make it sticky. But if there's nothing there at all, it rattles, it chatters, and that's most disconcerting. So I'll get these little tabs back in place that'll hold this in position. It's always awkward standing these screws up and driving them through. They tend to not want to go where you want them to go. Pick up one of these little metal tabs. Just check that moves smoothly. It does, no rattles. Put that to one side. Start cleaning up these pieces. Now these pieces should be free from grease pretty much. There should be nothing on here, and they're not free from grease. The only lubricant I'll put will be on that pin that follows the there's a little groove in the back of the mount, acts like a cam, so as the pin at the bottom follows the groove, it swings this arm backwards or forwards. So I'll clean all of these pieces in turn. The depth of field pointers here, they can cause problems if they at all sticky. Any stickiness there can cause a lot of grief, because the way they're all geared together, there's quite a bit of leverage on them. This is the separator that separates those parts. You can see there's a little bit of surface corrosion on this. I'm checking as I rub the cotton bud over there whether that's rough or not. If it was rough, I might want to polish that off, because that would be another thing that could cause grief. It would stop things moving freely. Then that might be a nuisance. These parts aren't as dirty as I'd feared. You can see there's not an awful lot coming off here. Now I've got the lens mount part all back together, I can put the springs in, get the springs back in place. Well, the larger diameter of the two springs is easy, because that just about falls over that pin. But the smaller diameter one, that has to be pushed over the pin, and it's not very enthusiastic. It's marginally easier to get it hooked over there than it is to take it off, but not much. That's it.